Good day, and welcome to part 28 of our study of the Book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to finish the parts of chapter 10 we didn't cover the last 2 weeks. So let me read them to you, starting at verse 8. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and whosoever breaks through a wall will be bitten by a serpent. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits wood may be endangered by it. If the axe is dull, and one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength. But wisdom brings success. Now, this is the first part of this last section, and some people would refer to it as foolishness in a workplace. It must be remembered when we do this that Solomon was not only a king, but he was also a builder. He built temples, he built houses, he built palaces. And in doing so, he probably employed thousands, tens of thousands of workers at that time. None of these workers would be unionized like we have today, and the conditions of safety would be probably non-existent. However, when you look at these verses, they look very superficial. And they look to be about foolishness in the workplace only. He who digs a pit may fall into it. We're all aware of people who carry objects, who dig holes, then carry things and fall into the holes that they've dug. Sometimes it seems foolish, sometimes it happens by pure accident, but people do fall into pits, into holes, trip into crevices that they themselves have built. It says that if you break through a wall, you can be bitten by a serpent. In the days when this was written, the walls of stone and of mud that were made in that area, serpents often curled up and made their homes inside the walls. So when a wall was being broken down, or if someone punched through a wall accidentally, there was a true danger, of being bitten by a serpent. One should be careful where one does these things. And it says again, he who splits wood may be endangered by it. If the axe is dull, and one does not sharpen the edge. So if you split wood, if you do something, especially if you're splitting wood and hit a knot, or hit something which is tough, it may deflect the axe. And this could result in your own injury. People using chainsaws are well aware of this phenomena of accidents happening. And it says those who quarry stones may be hurt by them. Solomon had huge stone quarries, and it was not unusual for men to be hurt by the stones or have stones fall on them. And these were all examples of what happened to the workplace and to people in the workplace in Solomon's day. But if you really think about it, Solomon was a king. He was a leader. He was someone who led his nation. And so you really have to look behind the words to find the true meanings, because there's more to this than meets the eye. He said, he who digs a pit will fall into it. And that refers as well as the literal sense. It refers also to those people who in government, in leadership, or in other areas of society, who start to make waves, who start to do things which they're not really capable of finishing, or if they need to start making changes which is beyond their capacity to really do. If they start producing waves and producing changes that they really cannot follow through with. So this means as well then the ability of someone, when they're doing something like this, to incite anger, to incite disagreements in the populace. And therefore they're actually, what they start to do becomes a hole in which they themselves are sunk into, because they anger the people they're trying to lead, or the people that are being led anger the ruler that is leading them. And one of the examples of this was Solomon's own son Rehoboam, who, after Solomon's death, tried to impose heavy taxes on the people, and they rebelled to the point that they actually split the kingdom. So it is a pit, it is a hole in which people start, but actually which pulls them into it themselves. You could see an example of this just south of the border a few weeks ago, when there was evidence of people trying to make a change by storming the Capitol. And now there's a big pit into which a lot of people have been drawn and have been encompassed by. So this is what this really means. If you dig a hole, if you dig a plan, if you make something, do something, make sure it's not a pit in which you fall into yourself. The second thing he says here, whosoever breaks through a wall will be bitten by a serpent. The idea of a wall in those days was, as I said, it was made of brick or mud or stone, and serpents often coiled themselves up inside these walls to live. But the real meaning of this is the fact that people under a king, including the subjects, have a degree of walls around them. They have some protection around them. They have some kind of a system in which they have protection. We have the Bill of Rights, the constitutions, which gives them a wall around which they have protection. When one tries to break this wall down, when one tries to change this wall, as it was in Solomon's day, if one tried to change the protection of the princes under him, or to change the way that people were governed, this sometimes led to problems, and like a serpent, the problem would bite back at the one trying to make the changes. The same thing with the stone. It says whoever people who carry stones, quarry stones, may be hurt by them. Sometimes people making small changes, trying to make small changes, actually unleash bigger changes they don't mean to do so. They sometimes tend to cause a cascade of problems because they try to change something which is well established in a small way, perhaps even well-meaning, but it unleashes a whole cascade of other problems which they did not anticipate. And therefore, one who quarries stones, one who tries to make changes, sometimes are crushed by those changes they're trying to make. He says also that he who splits wood may be endangered by it. If a leader or a person who is in power or is in authority tries to splinter things, tries to make changes in a sense that divides the people that the changes are meant to encounter or meant to provide for, sometimes by doing that, the splinters themselves cause problems. So what he's actually saying is that leaders have to be very careful how they make changes. And people have to be very careful how they try to make changes in their leaders, because all these things can lead to very serious problems which one may not anticipate in the beginning. And this is what he says at the end. And one who does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength. Because if people aren't smart in the way they do things, if people don't take advantage of the efficiencies that are there, then it can take a lot longer to do certain things, a lot more time, effort, and money to accomplish certain things than if they had done more due diligence at the very start. We often see this in governments and in government agencies where it requires a lot more effort to get something done than it really should, because the edges are not really sharpened. And this is what he says at the end, but wisdom brings success. Applying true wisdom to all of these aspects will enable one to be much more successful than he otherwise might be. So that's the first section. The first section is sort of the foolishness of the workplace. The second is the foolishness of the tongue. Because all of these things that we mentioned above And all of the other aspects brought about in this chapter are really influenced by what one says, what one does, and what one thinks. And now he's getting into the foolishness of the tongue. He says a serpent may bite when it is not charmed, because in those days they often had snake charmers which charmed and which caused cobras and venomous snakes to sway under the influence and the sway of the flute and of the instrument that was being used. But it says a snake, if it's not charmed, if it's not being held at bay by this, may bite. But so, Babel is no different. Needless talk, needless and excessive talk is really no different. So therefore, what one has to do is be careful with what one says, because excessive talk which is not really useful, can be more harmful than no talk at all. So it's really foolishness. Talking foolishness doesn't help any. It doesn't make any difference at all. Matthew 12:35 says, "A good man brings good, a treasure, because of the goodness of his heart. Evil man brings forth evil treasure and evil things." So, talk which is foolish means really nothing. And also says talk which is not tamed, tongue which is not tamed. The words of a wise man mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool shall swallow him up. This refers to people who are not careful what they speak and how they speak it. It's called an unkind tongue. Proverbs 10:32 says, "The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the fool is what is perverse." So, be careful with what you're saying is what Solomon is referring to here. Make sure that what you're saying is both tamed and controlled, and not just rambling and babbling about. Then he goes on to the next verse, says, "The lips of the fool shall swallow him up. The words of his mouth begin with foolishness, and the end of his talk is raving madness." An unwise tongue, Proverbs 10:19 says, "In the multitude of words sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise." Again, it's another way of saying that too much talk, too much idle talk, too much untamed talk can be dangerous. It can be dangerous for many reasons and many things. There was a saying during World War II that loose lips sink ships, and this really is the same thing. People who are not careful with what they say can cause a lot of harm and a lot of disagreement and a lot of difficulty to many people. And he says then, "A fool also multiplies words. No man knows what is to be. Who can tell him what will be after him?" Too many people are willing to say what the future is going to hold. They're willing to say what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen next week. They're going to make some degree of, if you want to use the word prophecy, about what's going to happen to a person, to a place, to an event. And there are all sorts of these people, if you look at the internet, who make prognostications about the future of currency, the future of ability, the future of what certain vegetables are good for you, what certain things are bad for you. Many of these people are really just talking. But it says that no man knows what is to be. Who can tell him what will be after him? It's an unreasonable tongue. Do not boast about tomorrow, Proverbs 27:1, "For you do not know what a day may bring forth. We're not to be concerned that much with the future, except to know generally what is happening, and to know generally how to conduct ourselves. There's too much foolishness going on about what's going to happen in the next day, the next week, the next month, and the next year. Then he goes on to say, who can tell him what will be after him? The labor of fools wearies them, for they do not even know how to go to the city. This was simply something of a joke, because what Solomon is really saying is that people make all these prognostications, all these prophecies, all these abilities and all these ideas about what will happen tomorrow. But if they're away from home, they can't even find their way back to where they belong. This is what he's really saying. People who know so much about the future seem to know so little about the present. People who know so much about the future in many ways know so little about the real important events and needs that the future may bring. So what he's saying here is be careful what you say. Be careful how much wisdom you have, or try to have, or try to show. Be careful. Don't speak needlessly. Don't speak irrationally. Don't speak excessively. Make sure that wisdom guides what you're trying to say. And really, James says this, if any man seeks wisdom, let him ask God. Then he may know better how to control what he is saying. And in verse 20, which we say at the last time, it says, do not curse the king, even in your thought. Do not curse the rich, even in your bedrooms. For a bird of the air may carry your voice, and a bird in flight may tell the matter. This is where the phrase that we know so well as a little bird told me actually originated. What he's saying is be careful what you say, even in the privacy of your own home, because there are means by which, and often ways by which, people who are being talked about will find out what you are saying. And this is even more important now that we have social media, we have Facebook and the internet. People are so sometimes careless in what they say or what they think about others on these mediums, that sometimes these thoughts often come back to haunt the person saying it. So this is what Solomon is saying, even in his day. Don't talk evil, don't talk bad about other people, even in the privacy of your home, because sometimes it gets back to haunt you by the person you're talking about, finding out what you're saying. And all of this has to do with the fact that Solomon was referring this to himself, to his people, and to his subjects. What he's trying to do is say, let wisdom conduct your attitude, that wisdom conduct your progress, whatever you do, use wisdom. Don't make programs, don't do things that are foolish, that you may fall into, or that may come down to haunt you, or that may bite you, or that you may be crushed under. Use your wisdom to do only what you need to do, but do it effectively and efficiently, and do it to the best of your ability. And don't let your tongue rule your body. Make sure that what you say is what you mean and what you actually refer to. Don't talk excessively, and don't talk out of tune. And don't talk about things you know little about. And try particularly not to talk too much about what the future will hold, when you have no idea what is going to happen even today. Be careful what you say. Be careful where you say it, because no matter what you do, it may get back to the person you're talking about, or get back to the one in authority. This is what they say, but if you can't say something nice about a person, don't say anything at all. So really this is the subject. Solomon, being a king and a builder, use these examples to indicate the problems that a leader of any type, a ruler, may get into by trying to change programs, trying to split people up into groups, trying to do things which may cause a rankle in what the system that's in existence actually does. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means be careful how it's done and use wisdom to control your actions and your thoughts. And that's what Solomon is trying to tell us in these verses. So next week, we'll get on to chapter 11, second last chapter in the book. We're getting there. So hopefully you'll join me next week. But that's all for now. Goodbye. See you next week.